Hello, welcome to Manic in Miami. This is Holly Hurricane, reporting from the calm after the storm. Hurricane indeed. I was discharged from the behavioral health unit yesterday. I'm calling this episode The Cure because due to the sort of life poetics that bring me personally immense joy, The Cure happened to be playing in Miami last night. A friend and I went to the show. I'm inherently goth, and it just seemed perfect. The cure is really that there is no cure. It's all about adapting our behaviors to fit into a high-functioning life. So I'm just going to briefly cover the specifics of my manic episode and hospitalization and what constitutes self-care and what constitutes self-sabotage. I'm just going to dig right in with reading a few excerpts from my discharge paperwork from the hospital. I was non-compliant with medication for a couple of weeks. This was a manic episode that combined the positive euphoric manic symptoms with some dysphoric, or as it's called, mixed state mania, in which elements of depression and mania coexisted, some delusional psychotic beliefs. The patient was oriented ×3, very awake and alert. The patient easily changes her mood from a passive behavior to an agitated, irritable, yelling, talking very quickly, and anxious. The patient said she stopped taking her medication because she wanted to see what life would be like without medication. She reported sleeping problems for the past 2 weeks. The patient has a past psychiatric history of bipolar affective disorder. The patient was admitted and given an IV of lorazepam, Benadryl, and Haldol. The patient was anxious, irritable, and agitated and argumentative with a loud voice, breathing very fast. The patient was very worried about her belongings. I did mention, luxury items, and so that's kind of funny. I was agitated about that. While I was in the ER, there was a man next to me convulsing and moaning. I was very agitated and did not want to be in his presence. I was hiding under my shirt. I also began practicing ballet while hooked up to the IV, and I was getting a bunch of interesting looks from staff in the hospital. Leading up to this, I had some positive symptoms of a euphoric manic episode. I had increased goal-oriented activity. I announced that I was going to resume endurance running, which used to be a major hobby of mine, and I posted on social media work to a 1:32 half marathon. Although I have run a half marathon and close to that time, that is a very lofty goal. I was very productive and dedicated. I attended my first adult ballet class, which was a huge highlight. I hadn't had a ballet class in 24 years, and I wanted to be in the first group doing jumps and turns across the floor. And then some of the negative manic symptoms brought on by some stressful interactions and triggers. I had feverish reaching out to people. I had at one point, the scariest point, the reason I checked in, delusional suicidal ideation, in which I thought that perhaps my soul was on this journey. Wouldn't it be great to just end the suffering in this life? The entrance into the next part of the journey. That is when, in fact, someone who's been on this podcast said, who is there that you're talking to? Can you please check in? Another person who I was really frustrating and angering, who I felt had wronged me, was very kind in encouraging me to check into the hospital. And so I really want to thank those people for their care and for their patience. The thought process was illogical and largely persecutory in nature, thinking that people were out to get me and ruining my life, and that sort of paranoia. The night before I checked in, 2 friends were with me. This was a blackout, so I don't remember those specific details. I did check in the following morning. I overpacked. I brought my ballet shoes, thinking that I would be dancing throughout the psych ward. I met a few people in the behavioral health unit. There was a girl who was 19 from Haiti. I'll call her Nadej. Nadej expressed to me that she was there for PTSD. She said it was for sex. She told me that she thought I was too pretty to be having such problems and to have a hard life, which I found very tragic, interpreted as projection by me. That made me very sad. There was a man who had a daughter with leukemia, and his wife committed suicide shortly after the diagnosis. And he continued for a couple of years as a single dad to his daughter with leukemia until she died. He said at that point he was reflecting on some bad choices, and he teared up talking to me, and he said he just never imagined that a human being could feel more alone and isolated in this world. And I think that's something that most of us struggling with mental health can relate to in one way or another. And I know that that feeling can be very triggering for me with my predisposed mental health condition. There was another man there, I'll call him Sean. Sean was a veteran who had been in the Army and had seen some horrible atrocities and had been made to commit some acts that led to a very severe case of PTSD. He didn't display symptoms of PTSD at first. He told me about his degree in aeronautical engineering. He was a smart, interesting, nice guy. He talked to me about wanting to go to law school. But that his mental health problems were in the way for now. And there was a trigger from a psych tech who really didn't do anything wrong, I'm not quite sure. And he just flipped a switch and was threatening all kinds of violence, and eventually threatened to torture and kill the psych tech's kids in front of him. And he said, "You don't know what I've done in the past," and then stating that he had actually killed children while he was in combat. There was a moment of comedic relief when he was listing the ways in which he was, trained in defense and able to fight someone. And he said Tai Chi. And so another girl and I did kind of laugh at that, and we both started to do Tai Chi. I think it shows how much our life events impact our mental health, and how it is such a complex intermingling of biogenetic factors and negative things that we experience. A combination of maladaptive behaviors, negative coping skills and coping mechanisms, self-sabotaging behaviors, just self-defeating patterns that we repeat. And those can only be managed and undone through medication and through therapy. We need medication to alleviate symptoms of our predisposed mental health conditions that are triggered by stress and pain. If you decide to cease your medication, then it's very difficult to manage the symptoms and our responses to these triggers. And so that's where I absolutely failed. And that is ultimately a self-sabotaging behavior. Sean, who had the PTSD, the veteran, talked to me about his night terrors, which I've experienced too. And when there was some trauma resurfacing last year, I had a bout of night terrors that I incorrectly attributed to a new medication, when really it was this trauma resurfacing. And I woke up in the middle of the night just screaming, sitting straight up and crying hysterically and shaking. And so if I'm not doing the work in therapy to understand where this is coming from, to accept it, and then to ultimately have them go away, what am I doing? I'm being overcome by this re-traumatizing fear and reaction and response. And all that can do is promote even poorer coping skills as I moved through life trying to manage my mental illness. And I talked about that with him for a little while. The single most common diathesis is self-imposed and artificial non-adherence to medications that would prevent and attenuate these symptoms dramatically. And if you consider like the loneliness and isolation, and in my case, perceived rejection and perceived abandonment that accompanies some of those feelings, that seems to be sort of a chicken and egg situation that is kind of largely academic when it comes to mental health care and medicine. And on that note, navel gazing is important to understand this core analysis, but ironically, it's not really important in the context of the most effective psychotherapies we currently have at our disposal. The goal of modern medicine and the goal of psychotherapy is to feel better, right? And even if we conceptualize some of our manic episodes and some of our psychotic states as useful in some way, maybe we believe they, harness this great creativity that we have, or we're accessing a sixth sense, etc. Ultimately, if these states aren't leading to a good feeling, how good are they? Like, what is the value there? There's the sad fact that, as I said, there's no cure. The cure is there's no cure. There's just management and proper self-care. There is no underneath work. There's no core analysis that's going to prevent mania from ever coming back. And if you think about it in terms of like human beings as animals, the most common animal instinct in all animals is to avoid harm. And most animals, some other animals do, most do not have these cognitive abilities we have, the consequences of which are defense mechanisms and denial and projection and rationalizing bad behavior. And these are utilized by everyone every day. In my case, this over-intellectualization and rationalization and these defense mechanisms led to my medication lapse, I believe. And that's when I think it's very helpful to have someone close to you who truly understands you and can see that things are going off the rails before you're able to recognize it. And in extreme circumstances, they can convince you to admit yourself to the hospital. That's when I say thank you again to people in the struggle who I'm connected to, who did recommend that I get further help. One person in particular I'll refer to as Person Y. In that moment, Person Y had absolutely no reason to engage with me further. Inviting these triggers into your life is self-sabotage, and it's also kind of a defense mechanism. It gives the triggered person rationalizations for all kinds of behavior that is destructive and irrational, and it's hurtful to oneself and to others that one is in a relationship with. I'm going to give this example using Person Y and calling myself Person X. I don't think anyone can say with certainty that something Person Y did, so the other did, was in any way responsible for Person X discontinuing medications or these negative toxic patterns of behavior and these toxic responses, right? Person Y, the other, can trigger me, can trigger Person X. There's like a lifetime of shit packed into my head, into Person X's head, that reacts to Y, and Person Y can't be held responsible for my history, for the history of Person X, and for my well-being in the present. Person X just needs to have the wisdom and maturity to divorce themselves from anything that can point in that direction at a certain point. And if Person X can make changes and become somewhat stable, and then eventually come back around with a healthy mindset, only then is there a chance for kind of repairing the damage that had been done to Person Y. Disengaging for a while is the right call, but I have to do the best I possibly can to take care of myself, to do the trauma recovery work, and to recognize my patterns, or else everything is self-sabotage. The unbearable feeling of having a lack of love, which I feel a lot. Yes, this lack of love, it's a horrific feeling, isn't it? It's so much pain. And I was speaking to someone else I know with the same mental illness today, and we were talking about it, and she made a valid point saying that lack of love is unbearable. We shouldn't have to pay for it tenfold just because of our mental illness. But at the same time, we have the responsibility, we have to take accountability, and there is an expectation that we will be able to manage our symptoms and to do the best that we can, a journey of self-healing and self-discovery to really be deserving of that love from these important people that we need it from. And a caveat on that is that we may also have to understand that sometimes these important people we're looking to fill this void and to give us this love are never going to be able to give it to us, due to their own inadequacies and their own problems. We have to find other people to be those important people because we do need love. And so I'm asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for forgiveness from Person Y. I'm asking for forgiveness from friends and family who were, racked with worry. And, I try to practice making amends and practice gratitude. For me, this comes sometimes in the form of material gift giving. suffering and self-sacrifice. I want to devote time and energy to the needs and troubles that other people are facing around me. I don't want to be like mired in this navel-gazing and this obsession with my own problems. I want to use what I've learned and listen to people, be an active listener and help people. Someone who was there for me before I went to the hospital, stayed, cleaned up my apartment, watched my pets, was just, a wonderful support. And another friend of ours who was a great help too. The person who stayed with me went to the Cure with me, and I owed her money for the ticket. So I got her a little greeting card, and I put the money for the ticket in the card in her mailbox, and I paid for her ticket as well because I want to pay it forward, and I want people to know that I am genuinely so appreciative of their persistent acts of kindness and their self-sacrifice for me. The love that I need in my life that helps me manage and deal with my mental illness and be this high-functioning person. So again, we cannot demand the love that we lack, but we can know where to look for it, and in certain cases, know where to stop looking for it. And we can earn it through the daily practice of healthy engagement, understanding, practicing what we're learning, and how to cope with these symptoms, because they are never fully going away, but we can be the wonderful, high-functioning, lovable people that we are when we're doing the best that we can. And sometimes the best that we can is checking ourselves in. And for me, it's also a big reality check. And I'm so calm on the other side and just so grateful and happy in this moment. Part of what makes me me and my personality is this mental illness as well. So I'm grateful to it as well. And that's my little synopsis and up on my little soapbox. So thanks for listening, guys. I hope you like The Cure. Yay! Inherent Goth Girl signing off. Bye-bye.